Have you ever worked with somebody who is extremely talented, very good at a particular set of skills, not right for the role that they're in, and it's just not working out, right? It's a really confusing situation to be in because you look at this person and you think, man, they're really good at this, and we thought if we put them in this role, it would work. And it usually takes a long time to figure that out, right? Because you know they're an A player at something, right? It happens all the time. It's really hard to figure that out. And I think the same, when we see that, I mean, when we're hiring someone, we talk about fit being everything. I mean, we have to have the right fit. It'd be better to have someone who's a little less talented in the right role, I would think. And we see that all the time. And so we think the same thing applies to our marketing and communications. There's sometimes we're doing something that's really great, but for whatever reason, it's not fitting, and ultimately it's not working. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Again, I'm Justin. You can find me on Twitter at Watkins. And I'm with a brand accelerator called Native Digital. We're over here in the Hyde Park area. It's a small group of about 16 of us right now. Show of hands, how many people here contribute or are in charge of marketing or communications or selling an organization that they're with? How many in the room? Most of us? Okay, that's good. This will be relevant then. And then how many of you would like to make a case to have more budget or at least accomplish more with the budget that you have? Same hands? Okay. All right. Hopefully we can do that today. We can hopefully give you some tips. What I wanted to walk through is just a few frameworks that we use and just open up our playbook a little bit and maybe give you a couple tricks and tools that you guys can apply to what you're doing. And we're going to start with a few lessons from Silicon Valley, not the TV show, but the place itself. So if you're near startup world at all, you'll hear a lot of people talking about pursuing product market fit. Is this a term you guys have heard before if you're talked with anybody in startup world? Everybody who's a startup, they're all pursuing product market fit. They're trying to figure out at what point does the product and what the market is wanting, does that fit really tightly? And until then, they're not going to be successful. They're going to be stuck as a small company or they're just going to die off, right? And so their growth curve while they're pursuing this, it's just way down here, but there's an inflection point at some point when they can prove, hey, we found fit. This is now working. There's a demand for this. And so the whole time they're doing that, they're operating on what's called an MVP, which is a term hopefully maybe you guys have heard, which is the minimum viable product. So they're trying to create this thing, not burn through too much cash as they're trying to iterate on this and get the product just right. So to do that, they start by saying, hey, I think this is a product or a service that people want. They have a hypothesis of what this is. But it's really important for them to output data. They need to be able to prove that it's working or not working. And I think a really important piece and something that I've struggled with over my career is, hey, what point does this prove that it's success and what point is it failure? And we need to pull the plug on this and iterate again. I think that's a piece that's missing often is setting that ahead of time of saying, if we don't achieve this, we're going to stop and shift and iterate and tweak. But this is the model that they follow, and it's proven to work really well for a lot of companies. So as an example, you guys probably are familiar with all the brands on the left. When they started, their hypothesis is different than what they are now, right? So Uber didn't start off with the idea of what they are today. In fact, it was a pretty simple thing. They just wanted luxury cars for other programmers, right? So they just thought it'd be cool if they could click a button and this luxury car would pull up. That's what it started as. And then over time, they shifted and pivoted and turned it into what it is today. Airbnb, it was all about conference attendees and how can we get more conference attendees if hotels are sold out. And so that's why it's called Airbnb, because they were throwing airbeds in people's living rooms. They had no idea that they would become what they are. They just started doing things and testing it out. YouTube's a strange one. I didn't know this. It started as a dating service. Did you guys know that? They changed their story. They originally were a dating service, and their tagline was tune in and hook up. So it was about uploading your video, right? If you hear interviews of them, they don't talk about this. They talk about how they went to the zoo and they just couldn't figure out how to share their footage. But this is really how it started. So they've changed their story. So this is how they started, but at some point, as they were iterating and pivoting and trying to figure it out, they found a product market fit. And instead of having a struggle to raise money, now they've got people like knocking on their door saying, can I give you money, right? I see what you guys are doing. I see what the metrics are. Can I give you money? And that's a great place to be in if you're in Silicon Valley or any kind of startup. So what's this have to do with marketing? Well, I think there still exists a lot of random acts of marketing. It's a very complex thing to do. There's so many options out there, right? Every year, more and more options, right? And so a lot of times we look around and we see what our competitors are doing and figure out what best practices are, and we attempt those things and try new things. The whole time we're doing this, typically people look at this as an expense. A lot of people who run organizations or businesses say, well, we've got to do this, but they don't look at it as an investment for growth. It's just this thing that we're supposed to do, and how little can we spend and get by, right? But there are ways to make this look like an investment. If you think about those startups, people are trying to invest in them as soon as they can get to a certain point, right? So that's what we're trying to solve for here today. So to most of the crowd here who would consider themselves marketers or maybe makers, how often are you asked that same question? Hey, I believe in what you're doing. I've seen the marketing plan and I've seen the results. Can I give you more money to keep doing this? Has anyone ever been asked this? It'd be cool if it did happen, right? It doesn't happen very often. It's because, again, people look at this as it's a bit of an expense, and maybe we're not arming ourselves with the information that would really make someone say that. So are there ways that we can prove that we have found a fit with the marketing that we're doing, our communications, to where people are saying, man, let's do more of that. I want to help this in any way. So we have been developing something that we're calling message market fit, and it has 4 components to it. And our goal is to do these things, can we prove that there's a fit with the way that we're communicating to where we can have the confidence that we have started to solve some of these problems. And like I said, there's so many variables, so we're trying to put it into 4 different buckets, and those 4 buckets are audience, brand, creative, and channel. So we're really trying to break everything down and see if we can achieve fit in each 4 of these to where we have this overall message market fit. And sometimes when we work with different organizations and companies, we'll realize that they're doing pretty well on a couple of these things, but there's a bigger opportunity for, let's say, channel, or maybe the brand needs help. So we're going to go through and we're going to look at one sample framework for each of the 4. Maybe one of these will be helpful to you guys. So we'll start with the first one. We'll start with audience. And the framework I wanted to share today was looking at, you have lots of different segments, right? Typically when you're doing marketing, you have 3 to 5 to 7 different personas or segments that you're speaking to. You also have people who are influential and people who are really the kind of the masses that you're trying to reach. If you're a small organization, you probably have a lot of these influential advocates. If you're a larger organization, you probably have the masses and you're hoping to hold on to those early advocates as well. But these are people who over here, the advocates, they're the minority. They're not the masses. They're, let's just say, 15% of your audience. If they vouch for you, then the masses will look at that and they will follow suit, right? So they're a really important audience to identify and to be in front of. But they want very different things, and they're really kind of very different people. So on the left, we have our influential advocates. They are ahead of the curve. They are seeking exclusive access or a personal relationship. And a message to them that would work well would be that it's new or it's innovative. And they're going to buy based on potential. They're going to put their money where they see potential. They have more vision. On the right-hand side is this majority, this more mainstream, and they're more practical. They're looking to the advocates and seeing what they're doing. And they're looking for something that's convenient. They are looking for proof that it works. They're looking to these advocates to say, hey, does this work? Because if I believe you, I'll do the same thing. And their message is it easy? Is it effective? I'm not going to put a lot of time and thought into this. And they want to buy based on, who's good at this? Who's the market leader? Who's proven to work? So again, the way you would talk to them is pretty different, right? If you talk to them the same, one of them is going to be turned off. So this is, I think, a good exercise, knowing that the advocates are kind of harder to identify sometimes and sometimes harder to impress. Do you guys know who your advocates are for your organizations? It's good to kind of imagine who those are and what they're looking for. Let's look at an example. Both of these, would you guys agree, are both mainstream products? Everybody's heard of both of these, right? So they're mainstream. Which one do you think does a better job of keeping those influential advocates? What do you guys think? Red Bull mostly? I heard one Bud Light. I would agree with Red Bull. I think Red Bull does a much better job. I think Bud Light is really struggling with this because who's influential on beer? Usually like beer nerds, right? People who like a really hoppy IPA. That's going to be the beer nerds. You're going to listen to them maybe. Bud Light doesn't know what to do with this. They're buying up those little breweries because they don't know what to do about it. In the meantime, with Bud Light, they're just making fun of them. So instead of saying, hey, advocates, this is good beer, they're saying, hey, let's make fun of this guy in the corner who asked for a mead and was asking about the ingredients. So they're basically saying, since we can't get them, we're just going to poke fun at them and make the masses feel good about what they're doing. So ignore the advocates, right? That's what they're saying. Ingredients don't matter. And then there was an interesting shift where during the Super Bowl they said, hey, ingredients matter a whole lot, actually. So they completely changed their strategy. Their strategy is, hey, let's make the masses care about ingredients just like the advocates do. So they're struggling here. They're trying to figure it out. A lot of people would say this is a great strategy, but you can see how they're trying to figure those two audiences out, right? At the same time, Red Bull has always done pretty unique marketing. A lot of times they're doing a lot of sponsorships. What I've noticed over the years is the logo, it used to be if you watched a YouTube clip, it would say Red Bull at the beginning or end, like on the screen. It's not really there anymore. It's just on stuff. It's in the environment. So whenever I'm at home trying to pump myself up to actually go running and watching a video, to do that, which doesn't work, by the way, I'll watch a video like this and be like, all right, I want to get on the treadmill. They're clearly sponsored by Red Bull because I'm studying that video, but a lot of people wouldn't realize that. They're like, man, this guy just wears the apparel and takes a drink. They're getting about 5 different touch points in there. And it's working. So they're on these they're talking to these fringe advocates who are into crazy things like running 100 miles, or the more like fringe comics like Norm Macdonald, who at the beginning of his show, he actually just takes one out of the fridge and sits down, but he doesn't ever mention it, and there's never a logo placed. He's just always drinking it now. So they do a really good job of staying in front of those advocates. So we talked about fit. It's nice to know these things. How do you prove that you have fit or you don't have fit, right? That's what we're going to do for each of these 4. I'm going to show you an example of how we've tried to prove fit with one of our clients. San Jose, California, it's the 10th largest city in the country. It's located in Silicon Valley, and they had a real problem. They have been living in the shadow of San Francisco for a long time. They're one of the 3 major hubs in the Bay Area. So you've got Oakland, San Jose, San Francisco. Anybody been to San Jose or from San Jose? Okay, a couple. It's good. So one thing I noticed whenever I showed up in San Jose is I would say, hey, where are you from? And they'd say Bay Area. And then I'd say, where at? They'd say Rose Garden or Willow Glen. They would skip San Jose and just say the neighborhood. So that's like someone meeting me and I said, I'm from the Midwest. And they said, oh, where from? And I say Brookside or Blue Springs or Lee Summit. Like, why would I skip Kansas City? It's because they had a really low self-esteem about where they're from. So the city, I knew this, and they said, we got to do something about it. And so that was our ask, was how do you raise the city self-esteem? That's not an easy thing to do. But we started with the city identity, and we started with the advocates, because you can't go to the masses without the support of the advocates. And so we found the tastemakers in town, as many as we could. We found about 40 of them. We sat down and interviewed them. We did our work, and then we showed them rather than the client first. And this was the city identity that we found. And we wanted something that people could live in the corporate environment, but it also look good on a t-shirt or in a skateboard shop or something like that. And so that's what we came up with. And we asked those tastemakers, hey, would you wear this? And when enough of them said yes, then we moved on to the next step. So at this point, usually an ad agency would say, hey, let's do a big press conference, let's make a big deal about it. And we said, we cannot do that. In fact, let's keep testing this. And so what we did was we did a live screen printing. So there was this craft fair, there was a lot of people there, and there was this booth where they were screen printing t-shirts, and it happened to be our logo and some of the different slogans and mantras that we had. And we were just selling them for $15 a pop. And every time we sold a t-shirt, we would write down who it was that bought it, what age they were, what ethnicity they were, and we're trying to figure out, is this going to a group that we don't think is influential, or is it a group that seems like they're influential in the community? And it sold really well, and so we were encouraged to go to the next step. So the next step was we made just a pile of stickers, and we just set them in coffee shops around town, and we would go back to see if they were still sitting there or if they were gone. And people were taking them. And we started seeing them on cars and laptops and skateboard helmets and the back of teenagers' phones. And so that gave us the confidence that we had found fit, and so we just kept moving forward. And it was about a 1.5-year process before it ever showed up in anything official. And we told the city that if this is successful, you will be accused of stealing this logo, which did happen. I didn't know if that would happen or not, but I just said it. So it's good. We found fit. We felt like we had fit. Strange things happen whenever you get people who are advocates for you, and you don't even have control of these situations, right? People will advocate for you in their own personal way. A really interesting story that we had nothing to do with, found out about later. There was a guy named Jake who worked at a brewery and lived right next door. And he was pushing about 380, and he just kind of lived in his little bubble in San Jose. And all of his friends said, man, you've got to get out and see more of the world. And so what he did was he just started jogging. And because he was embarrassed, he started jogging at like 2 a.m. at night because he didn't want people to see him. And he just did this every single day. And this was happening while we were doing our project. We had no idea. And eventually he drops 180 pounds and decides to run a marathon, his first marathon ever. And this took about 2 years or so. To celebrate that, he heard about the logo and he tattooed the logo on his calf. And because it was such an interesting story, all the local media picked up the fact that this guy has dropped 180 pounds, and the logo became a big part of the story because he had actually ran every single street, every single one in the city of San Jose, and this was his way of saying, hey, I really know my city and I've done this thing. So we saw this and thought, man, what an incredible story to be a part of. And we always thought it'd be cool to have our work tattooed on somebody. We never actually thought it'd happen, but it's possible. So that's audience fit. Let's go into the second one, brand fit. So everybody has different definitions of brand. I think for me, the easiest one to think about is it's the space that you have in someone's mind. Like what they think about you is really your brand. It's not all the other things. It's like what they think about. And so you got to realize there's limited real estate for where your brand lives in someone's mind, right? It's usually pretty simple. If we represent a brand and we're thinking about it, it's usually really complex. We think about all the steps that we need to go through and how we need to have this all documented and figured out. And these are great steps. We go through these with clients all the time. But you have to get it down to this really sharp, concise thing because, again, there's not that much real estate in their mind. To me, the most critical piece is the position. And it's the hardest one to get to because it has to be the simplest thing. It's really hard to get it down to a really simple, strong thing. And the word position means you have to take a strong stance. And you also have to get other people to agree with the strong stance that you're about to take, right? So that's a tough one. So we have an exercise, and I'd encourage you guys to try to do this yourself with the organizations you're with. People will categorize and rank things in their minds, right? It makes it easy for us to make quick decisions when we do that. Our brain just naturally does that. And so we do exercises where we have these like imaginary ladders, and we think, all right, for this organization, what are the ladders that exist in people's mind? What are the categories that they would put us into? So I'll give you an example. I think it'll help you. We're going to go back to the drink category, and we'll talk about beer again. So I think in some people's minds, there are categories for, hey, I want a cold beer, or I want a beer to relax, or I need a beer after a workout. So those are different instances that you could have. Which brands sit on the top of this ladder? Some brands spend a lot of money to try to have that ladder and sit at the top of it. Can anybody think of one of like who is a cold beer? Yeah, they'd love to hear that. Beer to relax. What's a relaxing beer? Corona? Anybody else? Yeah. Beer after a workout? Man, you guys are good. They spend a lot of money for you guys to say that, right? That's not an accident. Everything that Coors does looks cold, right? They have trains driving through the mountains and it's real frosty and icy. They want to own that because all of this stuff tastes about the same, right? So they've got to make something out of thin air so you will think, oh, that's this. It's all about the same, right? One's a little watery, but otherwise it's the same. So what's your ladder that you fit on? And you got to realize that it's a ladder that really has to exist there. You can't come up with a ladder that's too complex. It can't be a ladder that isn't even in their mind, right? And it needs to be a ladder that you can be towards the top, best case scenario, sitting number one. This is a really helpful exercise. It's a really tough exercise because you got to figure out what those ladders are and where do we think people rank. It's a tough one, but it's really helpful. So hopefully if you do that, you can make your position a little sharper. It's usually forces you to be a lot less complex. And it's really important to make sure you identify what you're not going to be. That's the toughest thing about this, is what are we not going to be? If you can figure out what you're not going to be, it really helps you figure out what you will be. And the quote I like is, most brands die from starvation, or don't die from starvation, it's more of indigestion. It's this idea that we're trying so hard to be everything to all people, the brand gets indigestion, that's when things really hurt. It's not because you're starving for more. So how do we validate a strong position? How would you, this is a tough one. Brand is one of the toughest things to get metrics on, right? Well, we've done an exercise like this for Politico in DC. We looked at 4 of their competitors, so Politico, New York Times, Washington Post, and Axios, and we asked Politico subscribers, we said, what are the attributes and the things that you would say Politico represents? And I've just pulled out a few because I can't give you all of them. But one that really stood out to us was insider. And so we took that and we got everybody on the executive team to agree that is us. Politico represents inside journalism. And we did believe that that was a ladder in people's minds. And that was a long conversation. Does that really exist? Do people say they want the inside scoop on things? We thought they did. And so their readers and their audience said, you guys do get credit right now for being more insider than your competitors. And we saw how that ranked against our competitors. So what we can do now is focus the brand on that position, and every year or every quarter, we can give the same survey to people and see, is insider climbing or is insider shrinking, or is it something else? And there's value in that. If everybody is saying the same thing about you, that makes you a very strong brand. You guys all just named Coors as the coldest beer. Like, they would love to hear that, right? And so that's a really strong thing. So that's a way you can validate that you've got fit there. So let's move on to the third one, creative. How do you guys evaluate creative? If a designer or a writer has shown you something, how do you evaluate that?
How successful?
Uniqueness. Feels good, looks nice, it's pretty. Yeah, it's subjective, right? So it's very hard to evaluate. We struggle with that too, everybody does. And so what we've done is we've developed checklists, and we've found attributes that we have found perform better. And so when we're doing ideation around content or advertising, we have a 10-point checklist that we evaluate our ideas on. And so we don't do that at the beginning of the brainstorm. We do mini brainstorms, and when we get to our best ideas, we run it through this checklist. And it really helps, and what we find is we usually flunk it the first time. The ideas that we think are so good only answer a couple of these well. And so it's things like, does it open strong? Because if it takes a while to get to it, a lot of people aren't going to pay attention. Is it digestible? Can people see it quickly, or is it too long? Is there emotion that's going to bring, can we bring emotion out in people, or is it just so informational that nobody's going to really care to it or can't connect to it? And does it help people, or is it just self-serving? So those are 4 of these. I don't want to go through the whole list because it's a whole other talk, but I want to jump to the bottom to my favorite one. And originally, my favorite one was, is it unexpected? Because we felt like everybody has access to this internet, and the internet has everything, right? There's nothing surprising left, right? It's really hard to catch people off guard and to show something that's unexpected. So this is the context. So how do you show something unexpected? And whenever I introduced this list, everybody on the team nodded their heads and said, sure, this sounds like a good list. One of the designers came up and said, hey, Justin, any tips on how to make something unexpected? Which is a fair question. And my answer was, oh yeah, great question. And I didn't have an answer. Which is what a lot of managers do, right? They're like, do this, don't know how to do it, but just do that. So I was guilty of that. So I went back to the drawing board. I'm like, man, what do I have to figure out a way to give my team advice on this, because I can't just say unexpected. That's unreasonable. And what I came up with was, what can we do that's wrong? And what best practice can we break? Because what I found was the work that I felt like was unexpected all had this going for it. And so every time I see something, I'm like, man, that's a little different. They'd always messed with it, tweaked with it a little bit. Something was a little off on it. And the reason is because wrong is real. We're really highly trained consumers, right? We know how this stuff is supposed to look. And we can smell advertising a mile away. It's really easy to spot when it's advertising, right? So whenever I first found this, I was like, this is awesome. Like, we know how to make stuff unexpected. We were making it a little too wrong. And so very quickly we reeled it back in, and what we got to was 10% wrong. Like, good work is 10% wrong. And that's a good rule of thumb to follow. And it's also a lot of fun too. It's easy to get approved. If it's 50% wrong, you're not getting that stuff approved. So 10% wrong is a good place to be. So how do you validate a good fit with a creative message, right? This is another tough one. How do you validate that you've got fit? If you've worked anywhere around a media plan or been in marketing for a while, you see charts like this. Creatives, this makes them tune out instantly. They don't care about this. They go cross-eyed. But it's charts that have things like cost. How much did it cost? What are the impressions? How many people saw it? How many people clicked on it? What's the click-through rate? What's the cost per acquisition? Right? So if you were trying to identify which creative was better, there's a lot of things to look at. A lot of people will jump right to cost per acquisition. That's a really strong term. Are we getting good investment on this? Some of these have better CPAs than others. The problem with CPA and some of these end of the funnel metrics is there's so many variables tied into it. This has different audiences, different creative. They've clicked on it, they've gone to a website, there's 5 different pages. There's a lot of variables, right? So if you're just trying to identify creative, it can be difficult. And so we look at those things and we say, all right, we're not getting the results we need, so should we spend more? Do we have new channels? Do we have new creative? What do we do? If we can just break it down and say, all right, can we get the message right first? Let's just look at the click-through rate. Click-through rate's the one that says, did this message make people have an action? So if you just isolate click-through rate for a second, not try to solve the whole problem, just solve the creative problem, click-through rate's going to get you there, right? And so if you think like that, you're going to look at this chart and be like, man, there's 2 messages here that are really performing well. What about that is working? And these others, they're not even hitting industry standards for this particular medium. You know, we expected to get 2 or 3%. These are struggling. So what can we learn from this? So when you do things wrong, I think you can make big leaps. There's also times where you just need to make incremental success. You can do A/B testing. There was a really good example of this when Obama had his '08 campaign, and they had a sign-up page where people could sign up for emails. And they tested different imagery, and they tested different call to action buttons. Which one do you guys think performed best? 1, 2, or 3? What do you guys think? 3? 2? Anybody else? Nobody's saying 1? We got a 1? Okay. You guys are kind of spread out. I saw this and I thought number 3. That seems motivating to me. That's an actionable word. Join us now feels like a really strong call to action. I was wrong. It is. They started with the one on the left. And the one on the left had get involved, just Barack, and it was sign up. And that had an 8.3% conversion rate. As they tested every image separately and every button separately, and they found the best combination was the black and white photo with his family, change we can believe in, and learn more. And the winner was 11.6%. This was on such a big scale that the difference between 8 and 11% was $60 million in fundraising. So good for them. And so even at that scale, even incremental stuff can make a big difference. But you know, there's a couple things we can learn from this. One is set the bar high and know what the industry standards are. So what is it that you should get out of this? And do you think you can reach that? And then when you find a winner, don't go looking for more winners. Let's just double down on those winners. I think a lot of times that doesn't happen. We say, oh, this is working, so now let's go solve another problem, when we could just double down on the thing that's working. I rarely see that. I'm kind of surprised by that. And then there's a feedback loop. If you have designers or writers or videographers working for you, do they know when it works, or are they kind of in the dark? A lot of them don't care about it, so you don't tell them that stuff. But if you can teach them to care about it, a lot of them, you might be surprised. They'll say, oh, this works, so I'll do more of this now. So I think that's really helpful. Are we getting into the weeds now? Are you guys good here? Is this helpful? All right. I want to bore you with too many numbers. Okay, the next one is channel, and it can get a little complex, so I'll try to keep it a little simple. I don't know if you guys, this might feel like work, so I don't want you guys thinking you came to a boring session. The fourth one here is channel. And again, like I said, it can get pretty complex. So we're just going to make it a game. Let's all imagine that we work for a B2B organization and we have a new product that we're going to sell. So our audience is people who work at enterprise level companies, okay? That's as far as we'll go on that. If we had this product and we're trying to reach people, these organizations, and we only had budget to do 3 things, which of these 3 would you guys do? Would you do number 1, which is print, banners, paid search? Would you do number 2, where it's an article, it's a YouTube video on your channel, upload a SlideShare presentation? Would you do number 3, where it's a LinkedIn ad, video ad, paid search, and a gated white paper? What would you guys do if you had to only do 3 of these things? 3? Anybody? Paid search is whenever you type something into Google and the ads pop up right there. Mm-hmm. Anybody with number 1? No ones? Anybody number 2? How many number 3? The majority. You guys are smart. I agree with you. But let's break this down a little bit. So there's a lot of variables to think about when we're looking at those decisions, right? Here's 6 of them. So we could be thinking about the stage. Are we doing awareness? Is it consideration? Are we converting them? Is it retainment? Is it a push and pull? Are we trying to generate demand, or is there demand out there and we're just trying to acquire that? Are we trying to blast a shotgun message, or are we just being really specific with a more one-to-one? How much quality time does it have? Do we need to just a glance, or do we need to spend a lot of time with them to really tell them the full story? How much effort is this going to take? Is it a pretty easy lift, or is this going to take a long time just to produce the things that we need? And then what's the value duration? Is this a flash in the pan effort, or is this something that will grow in value over time? So there's a lot of factors to evaluate, and it's hard to keep those in your head when you're looking at a slide like this last one, right? So we're probably thinking of a few of those things. We're probably also thinking about what our competitors do, and is this a best practice? So how do you validate that? You guys are really smart. You guys picked number 3. Maybe I didn't make this tough enough. On number 1, there's a couple things. There's no quality time in that, right? They're getting a lot of impressions, there's a lot of reach, but there's very little quality time, and it's all short-term value. It's not going to pay off. Once you stop spending the media dollars, it's just done, right? The second one, you get to own that content for a long time, but it's not going to get out to a big audience if you don't have a huge following, and you're going to need some quick wins because you're launching this as a new product. Number 3, we all agreed, is the winner. And if you have something as simple as a scorecard here, you can kind of look at all of these different factors and say, man, do I have all the boxes checked? Do I feel like I've got something that takes people on this journey all the way through? So you could say on number 3, well, you've really kind of got all of your stages covered, because the LinkedIn ads are going to get in front of them at the beginning. The gated white paper could be used for retainment. The reach is high because you're putting paid into LinkedIn. But you've also got some low reach too with the quality of that white paper. You're pushing the message out to people on the LinkedIn. You're pulling it with the search. The effort for the white paper is pretty high. The effort for the video is probably pretty high. Paid search isn't as high, not too bad. So it's not all high effort things. The quality time, the video and the white paper is really quality stuff. It's pretty in depth, but the paid search is going to be a quick glance. And then duration of this, everything you're putting paid is going to be a quick thing, but over time that white paper should just continue to be valuable and valuable over time. So if you did a scorecard on all 3 of those, this would paint a pretty good picture of what you do. So again, it's just to make sure you don't have too many blind spots on what you're doing. And it doesn't prove your effectiveness yet, but it helps you move forward with a lot more confidence that you've really evaluated it. So to wrap this up, if you break down your marketing and look at these 4 channels, and you've got advocates who are advocating, position that is strong, message that spurs action, and your channels are producing results, you're a whole lot closer to finding fit. And so what we've walked through today is really just a start, but hopefully one of these frameworks or a couple of them might be helpful to you. And I guess the question I'd ask is, this is just a start, but if you felt like you were approaching message market fit, do you think others would invest in what you're doing? And the other question is, you might not even need it, because if this becomes more effective, you're just doing more with what you've got. So I would wrap it up with, if you can map it and you can visualize it, that really helps. If you can run experiments at all times and have success and failure criteria. That really helps to make sure you're always advancing. And the other thing is, don't get overloaded with the complexities of this. Stay light, stay loose, have fun with it. Make it a game for yourself. It can be a pretty fun game. So the last question I'd ask is, hit me up on Twitter. Tell me where you guys have found fit. I'd love to know where you guys have found a really tight fit. So thanks for your time, guys.